not like to kiss. I know. And he's always in a bad mood, and I always thought it was my fault. He does have a good sense of humor when he would come on the set 3 hours late in a bad mood. But we always had a good time. He likes to play jokes and things. Yes, he's a very good person. He just has an issue with women, that's all.
Jane Fonda spent decades in Hollywood, and she's never been shy about calling things out. So when she reached her late 70s and started opening up about the people she clashed with, fans were stunned. These weren't small disagreements or mild annoyances. These were names she openly admitted she couldn't stand, actors she struggled to work with, and personalities that pushed her patience to its limit. Today, we're going to reveal the 7 celebrities Jane Fonda said she hated the most. Number 1, Brigitte Bardot. Jane Fonda's dislike of Brigitte Bardot wasn't a casual feud, it was deeply personal, tangled up in her identity, her marriage, and the way the world refused to let her be just herself. For Fonda, being constantly compared to Bardot was more than annoying, it felt like erasure. When Fonda moved to Europe, she became Roger Vadim's wife. Vadim had famously been married to Bardot before, and that connection haunted her. In a 1968 interview with John Sandy Lands, reported later by Far Out magazine, Fonda admitted something startling. Sometimes, when I go into Saint-Tropez with Vadim, people call me Brigitte. People on the street, face to face, shouted Brigitte at her, as if she were Bardot reincarnated. For someone trying to build her own identity, that must have felt like a cruel joke. Fonda didn't just shrug it off, she was baffled. As she put it, I don't know how people can make that mistake, because to her, the resemblance was superficial at best. More than that, she was terrified of Bardot. I've met her, but I can't talk to her. She scares me to death. That's not distant admiration, it's fear mixed with awe. Why the fear? Part of it came from Bardot's sheer presence. Fonda described her as a real phenomenon. In a room filled with powerful personalities, you are still constantly aware that she is there. Bardot wasn't just another actress to Fonda, she was an icon, the kind of star who magnetizes attention and dominates with charisma. That dominance made Fonda deeply uncomfortable. Then there's Fonda's critique. She didn't just fear Bardot's power, she dismissed some of her work. In the same interview, Fonda said almost with defiance, of course she has made a series of very bad pictures. It's not a flattering assessment. For someone who knew just how brutal Hollywood could be, Fonda's judgment cut both ways. She recognized Bardot's star power, but wasn't afraid to say she didn't respect all her movies. Another layer, image. Fonda was molded by Vadim into a kind of sex symbol, Barbarella, the cosmic space vixen, but she always felt she was living under the shadow of Bardot. According to a Beauty Archive profile, when she was starting out, Fonda was told she didn't look right for Hollywood. She dyed her hair blonde, wore falsies, even had her lips repainted because she was being pressured into a Bardot-like mold. Imagine having to remake your face just to fit a comparison you didn't want. That would sting. Saint-Tropez itself symbolized this identity trap. Fonda hated going there, she said in one interview, because every trip felt like walking into Bardot's world. The paparazzi, the fans, the constant reminder that she was the ex's wife. She once broke down in tears over traffic when just trying to do groceries. Number 2, Jean-Luc Godard. Jane Fonda's relationship with Jean-Luc Godard wasn't exactly love. She's praised him. Yes, she called him a great filmmaker, but made it brutally clear she couldn't stand him as a person. This all came out publicly at the 2023 Cannes Film Festival when Fonda didn't mince words. According to her, Godard's talent is undeniable. I take my hat off, a great filmmaker, she said. But then came the mic drop. But as a man, I'm sorry. No, that's not just respect tinged with reserve. It's admiration plus deep disapproval. So what's behind that stark line? To understand, you need to go back to their work together. Fonda starred in Godard's 1972 film, Tout va bien, a movie about labor strikes and political upheaval. They weren't just collaborators. For a moment, they were intellectual sparring partners exploring serious social themes. But soon enough, the actor's view of the man diverged sharply from her view of his art. That tension got even more personal after their collaboration. Godard and his partner, Jean-Pierre Gorin, made a 52-minute film called Letter to Jane, Letter a Jane, that centers on a single published photo of Fonda in Vietnam. In the film, they dissect that image with cold, clinical analysis, part political essay, part personal attack. Fonda later called that work a big pile of bullshit. For her, the piece wasn't a flattering homage. It felt like narcissistic snide deconstruction of her persona. On top of that, Fonda wasn't wasn't shy when she labeled Goddard narcissistic. She raised a pointed question: how much does who someone is in their private life affect their art? In other words, she understood the brilliance of his cinema, but didn't think his private character measured up. Number 3. Robert Redford, Jane Fonda, and Robert Redford, Hollywood legends, box office gold, and yet not exactly best friends. If you think these two icons were always on the same page, think again. Fonda has made it clear in interviews that working with Redford could be frustrating, and at times, downright stressful. The tension started on the set of The Electric Horseman, 1979. On paper, it was a perfect pairing. Redford's rugged charm, Fonda's sharp wit, a story about a corporate cowboy with a conscience. But behind the cameras, Fonda revealed the experience was far from harmonious. In an interview with Vanity Fair, she admitted that Redford could be emotionally frustrating to work with. She described him as someone who could be charming one minute and distant the next. This inconsistency made collaboration difficult, especially for an actress who prided herself on precision and energy on set. Fonda also spoke about Redford's perfectionism, which, unlike her own work ethic, leaned toward controlling behavior. She recalled instances where he would constantly tweak scenes, insist on multiple takes, or overanalyze dialogue delivery, even when Fonda felt the take was perfect. It wasn't malice. Redford was a consummate professional, meticulous about his vision, but for Fonda, it was exhausting. Sometimes you feel like you're walking on eggshells, she confessed, because you never knew if you were hitting the mark in his eyes. Then there was the personal side. Redford had a reputation for keeping his private life private, and while this seems harmless, it often made him appear distant or aloof on set. Fonda, who is candid and expressive, sometimes clashed with his cooler, reserved demeanor. She described moments where she felt Redford's coldness seeped into their interactions, leaving her unsure if her own energy and performance were being appreciated. This created a subtle but persistent tension between them. Another layer of friction came from ego and influence on set. Both Fonda and Redford were major stars in the late 70s and early 80s. Fonda admitted in interviews that there were moments when Redford's celebrity status made it hard for her to assert her own ideas. She respected his craft, but being in a partnership with another iconic figure sometimes felt like a tug of war over creative space. She said, "You want to shine in your own right, but it's tricky when the person across from you carries that kind of aura." Despite these tensions, Fonda did acknowledge Redford's strengths. He was charismatic, skilled, and brought serious dedication to his work, but she never sugarcoated the downsides. She told a talk show audience that working with Redford was a constant balancing act between admiration and frustration. "You respect him," she said, "but you also want to throttle him sometimes." Number 4. Marlon Brando. Jane Fonda's take on Marlon Brando wasn't warm and fuzzy. She called him disappointing. That's a strong word coming from someone who grew up in Hollywood and has worked with some of the biggest names. But she didn't trash him completely. She balanced her critique, calling Brando a great actor, even as she expressed real disappointment in him personally. So what was behind that word? For Fonda, the disappointment in Brando seems to be less about a specific event and more about a mismatch between public image and private substance. Brando was legendary. His charisma, his talent, his raw, untamed presence on screen. She respected all that. But behind the scenes, Fonda apparently felt let down. In her confirm or deny round with the New York Times, Fonda didn't sugarcoat it. When asked about Brando, she didn't laugh it off or claim it was all admiration. She said simply, disappointing, but a great actor. That contrast is clear. She admired his craft, but felt he failed her in other, more personal ways. Why that contrast stung so much? Fonda and Brando shared the screen in The Chase, 1966. She was relatively young then, ambitious, hungry, wanting to make meaningful work, but also to connect. Brando, with his heavyweight star power, could have been someone she looked up to, learned from, or even depended on in some emotional way. But Fonda's reflection suggests she felt something was missing. She didn't elaborate extensively on what disappointing meant, and she wasn't bitter. She never accused him of betrayal, cheating, or cruelty in public. Instead, her critique feels more existential. Brando had the talent, but in her view, lacked the personal warmth or emotional reliability she might have hoped for. That emotional letdown may not have been dramatic, but for someone self-aware and bold like Fonda, it was deeply felt. Her disappointment also reflects Fonda's lifelong tension between her public persona and her private self. She was always navigating who she was, the activist, the actress, the daughter, in a male-dominated Hollywood. In that context, Brando seemed like part of the old guard, brilliant but perhaps emotionally unavailable. She respected him as a legend, but didn't need to pretend their personal energies aligned. Some of her comments suggest that she's grown past bitterness. She names Brando with clarity and calm, not with rancor. In her later years, she joked about what she regrets, and she named Marvin Gaye, not Brando, as someone she wished she'd gotten closer to. That subtle shift is important. Her disappointment didn't turn into hatred. It stayed as a clear-eyed critique. Number 5. Lawrence Harvey. If you think early Hollywood was all glitter and mutual backpatting, meet the moment Jane Fonda walked onto the set of Walk on the Wild Side and came face to face with Lawrence Harvey and hated every minute of it. She didn't say, "I love the guy." She said the experience was difficult. That word, difficult, covers a lot. Coldness, passive aggression, and a kind of brittle hostility that can make a young actor feel small and exposed. Fonda was a newcomer then, booked into a high-pressure film with heavyweights like Barbara Stanwyck and Capucine. Walk on the Wild Side could have been a crash course in how stars behave at the top of their game. Instead, it became a lesson in how not to work with certain co-stars. In interviews years later, she admits it. She didn't get along with Lawrence Harvey. She called working with him unpleasant, describing scenes where his mood swings and icy demeanor turned the set into a minefield. So what actually happened? Harvey had a reputation, then and now, as an actor who could be brilliant on screen but prickly off it. Contemporary accounts and later retrospectives describe him as emotionally distant and often aloof. On Walk on the Wild Side, he reportedly delivered one-liners that read like barbs, and his style of working didn't mesh with Fonda's. Imagine trying to find your footing as a young actress while your scene partner alternates between charmless sarcasm and stony silence. Fonda said it left her drained. She was there to perform, to learn, and to be seen. Instead, she felt tested and at times belittled. The tension also came down to chemistry or the lack of it. Some actors feed off each other. They lift and push one another. With Harvey, Fonda felt instead an edge. In one anecdote from the set, other cast members recalled Harvey making caustic remarks to co-stars, a behavior that made the mood brittle. Critics and later writers noted scenes where Harvey's delivery felt almost performative in its disdain. And when the camera cut, that disdain didn't disappear. For a young actor already anxious about proving herself, feeling actively disliked creates a kind of professional humiliation. There's a generational and cultural layer too. Harvey was of an older cohort of English actors with a particular reserve, and let's be blunt, an ego that came with years of being packaged as a certain kind of leading man. Fonda was brash, open, hungry. She didn't fit his expectations. Rather than a friendly mentorship, she got a form of testing, and by her account, a lack of basic collegial courtesy. That mismatch in temperament escalated a normal workplace tension into something that felt personal. Did Fonda hate him? She framed it in interviews as dislike and discomfort, not hatchet job hatred. She learned from the experience though. It taught her how to navigate difficult personalities, how to hold her ground in an environment that could be dismissive of young women. In later interviews, she referenced the set as a tough schooling, one that hardened her, and frankly, helped forge the resilient performer the world knows. So while the feeling was strong, I didn't like working with him, it fed into a larger arc of growth, not just grievance. Number 6. Megyn Kelly. Jane Fonda versus Megyn Kelly is one of those modern celebrity dust-ups that starts small and then turns into full theater. It began with one awkward question and then exploded into a weeks-long exchange that exposed a deeper clash about respect, aging, and what interviewers owe their guests. The moment everyone remembers came in September 2017 on Today. Fonda and Robert Redford were there to promote Our Souls at Night. Out of nowhere, Megyn Kelly asked Fonda, in front of millions, whether she'd had plastic surgery. It was blunt, personal, and tone-deaf. Not about the film, not about the craft, just a camera-ready poke at a woman's appearance. Fonda froze, then clipped the question with cool contempt. You could see it, the wrinkle of discomfort, the instant decision to refuse that frame. That exchange set the tone. Kelly didn't let it die. She defended the question, and then escalated. On her show, she ran a long monologue defending herself, and even attacked Fonda's political past, dredging up Vietnam-era controversy. That turned a single bad question into a public fight. People picked sides. Some said Kelly was doing hard journalism. Others saw a seasoned host needlessly humiliating an older woman on national TV. Fonda's response was measured but firm. She called the question inappropriate and later said the interviewer should learn her stuff before putting that on air. In short, Fonda didn't just push back. She made it clear she expected better. Why did the moment land so hard? Because it tapped a raw nerve. Fonda has been open about her mixed feelings on cosmetic work. She's admitted to surgery, said she both regrets and understands it, and has talked about aging honestly. That makes her answer both personal and and principled. When Kelly framed the subject as a gotcha, Fonda saw it as a violation, not of vanity, but of dignity. The question wasn't curiosity, it was spectacle, and Fonda has spent decades fighting to be taken seriously for her work and activism, not reduced to a list of procedures. That's why her reaction felt so intense to many viewers. Fonda handled it the way she often does, with a mix of wit and authority. She later joked about the moment on Today with Lily Tomlin, using humor to diffuse the sting, but she didn't let the issue slide entirely. She told Vanity Fair she would go on Kelly's show again if Kelly learns her stuff. Translation: yes, she'll show up for good journalism, but she won't be the set piece for sloppy, humiliating television. That line made the dynamic clear. The problem wasn't the host's right to question, it was the host's choice to weaponize a personal subject for clicks. There's another angle: power and carding of history. Megyn Kelly tried to lecture Fonda about Vietnam and political mistakes, which reopened old wounds in a way that felt performative. For Fonda, who'd spent decades as an activist and who has apologized and reflected on her Vietnam era actions, that felt like moral grandstanding from someone who was using controversy for ratings. So the spat was about two things at once: the immediate slight and the larger question of who gets to lecture whom on matters of conscience. Number 7. Roger Vadim. Jane Fonda's feeling about Roger Vadim was sharper, and a mix of resentment, humiliation, and the slow burn of realizing she'd traded her self-respect for a role and a relationship that left her hollow. She has said the marriage changed her in ways she didn't like, and those changes stuck with her for decades. Here's the setup. Vadim was already famous for turning Brigitte Bardot into an icon. He was charismatic, European, and very good at creating sexualized images of women on film. When a young Jane Fonda married him in 1965, she stepped into that orbit. Vadim pushed her toward a sex kitten image. Think Barbarella. And the world began to see her as an object first and an actor second. Fonda later admitted that Vadim encouraged the Barbarella persona, and that at the time she followed his lead, but she paid a price for it. What makes the relationship bitter in hindsight is the way Vadim handled sex and power. Multiple first-hand accounts from Fonda describe a marriage built on his rules. He brought other women into their bed, expected sexual arrangements, and steered Jane toward public images that she didn't fully own. Fonda has said the menage scenes and the idea of sharing him hurt me and reinforced my feeling I wasn't good enough. That line is the key. It reveals the emotional damage, not a single betrayal, but a continual corrosive message that she had to perform worthiness. There are a few sharp moments Fonda has shared that cut through the Hollywood gloss. She's described times she felt pressured to accept Vadim's sexual freedoms to avoid being abandoned. She later wrote and spoke about how, while Vadim's influence opened doors professionally, it also taught her to trade intimacy for approval. She didn't just lose a husband, she lost a sense of agency over how she looked and how the public read her work. Those are wounds that move beyond anger into core identity issues. Professionally, it got messy too. Fonda has admitted she started to resent the roles Vadim steered her into, the flashy, shallow parts that fit his brand of cinema. She realized bit by bit that she was becoming Vadim's other woman in the public eye, not Jane Fonda the actress. That was part of why she pulled back and made the daring choice to play in They Shoot Horses, Don't They? A role that helped reclaim her credibility and put distance between the Barbarella image and the actor she wanted to be. That career pivot was also personal survival. Their split in 1973 wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was a break with the version of herself she'd been groomed to perform. After the divorce, Fonda wrote and spoke openly about the ways the relationship taught her what she didn't want: the loss of control, the constant performance of desirability, the quiet shame of being treated like a prize. She has never painted Vadim as a cartoon villain. Instead, she describes him with the weary clarity of someone who learned a hard lesson about power, sex, and image. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us which name surprised you the most. Your support helps the channel grow, and we'll see you in the next one.